Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this Your Overseas Home webinar. Today's session will be explaining the new rules for travelling to France that have come into effect since Brexit. In particular, we're going to explain the new 90 days in 180-day rules and what options you have should you want to spend longer in France. My name's Hannah Armstrong, and I'm going to be the host of today's session for you. Many of you will have come across our business already. What we do is we've been helping buyers with their property purchases overseas for over 10 years now. And what we aim to do is help you avoid any pitfalls in the process, save money, and crucially make this really exciting step in your life as enjoyable as possible. Now, with the travel restrictions lifting and the COVID situation improving all the time, we've really seen a surge in demand for overseas properties from our clients in recent months. So we're really excited to have you with us today and help you on this journey. Now, with me today to share her expertise on this subject is Tracy Leonetti. Now, Tracy was born and raised in Hull in Yorkshire, but with a passion for travel, she chose to settle in the stunning Côte d'Azur in France. Tracy found the transition to her dream life in France a little challenging, and that was a key motivation for her setting up her business back in 2002. Throughout this webinar, Tracy will tell us more about how LBS can help you have a seamless transition to your new life in France. Throughout today's discussion, we will aim to answer as many of your burning queries as possible. And for those of you who are joining us live today, if you want to ask a question, please do type that into the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will aim to answer as many of these as possible for you. We estimate will be around 45 to 50 minutes for today's session. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Tracy, and it would be wonderful, Tracy, if you could just start by giving us a little bit of background into your business and how you are able to help our viewers.
Yeah, hi Hannah, hi everybody, thanks for having me here today. So yes, I'm Tracy Leonetti and I've been living in the south of France for 30 years now, and the business itself was set up specifically because when I came to France all those years ago, it was so complicated, all the paperwork and the administration. So I realized it shouldn't be that complicated, and my business model was to really help those people get a smooth transition. So what we do is we help anybody who is moving, living, or have a business in France navigate those really rough waters of the French administration system. So, we have clients from all over the world, not just the British, of course, which is a new market because of the whole Brexit problem. Our clients often come from America, Australia, who are non-Europeans, but I also have people who are in France who are having difficulty with the healthcare system, immigration, car registrations, driving licenses, and of course finding the dream properties. So we kind of go from A to Z.
That's wonderful, Tracy. That's fantastic that customers can come to you and sort of almost get a full service. That's brilliant. Now, starting with the questions, I think we'll perhaps start sort of slightly more on the holiday side of things and then move into customers who are looking at more permanent residency and relocation to France. So starting with, some customers have asked, they're British and they would like to come to France for holidays. What do they need? They've heard they might need a Schengen visa. Is that the case?
So if we're talking about British people coming to France for a holiday period, then they don't need to have a Schengen visa. For those of you who are not sure what Schengen is, there is a Schengen area of 26 countries where there is no border controls, and therefore you can travel around in that Schengen area freely with no stamping of passports. So what normally happens is it's a tourist visa. The Schengen visa is a tourist visa. It's a 90-day visa, and certain countries have to have this visa. Countries that don't have to have it, British people don't have to have a Schengen visa to come into France. Neither do Americans. So I would suggest anybody who's coming to France just for a 2-week or 2-month holiday, they can come into France with no Schengen visa, so long as they respect the 9180, which of course we'll discuss as we go along. So they don't need to get a visa.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Tracy. Now, moving on from that question, and a lot of our listeners obviously are thinking about a property purchase for France. And traditionally, we would have been able to come and go from holiday properties in France as we wished. If you own property in France, are you still able to do that? Or does the 90 in 180 days still apply to you if you own property in France?
Absolutely, yes. If you're a property owner but are not a resident of France, then the 9180 rule will apply to you. The only people that would not apply to, of course, are residents in France. So, you know, unfortunately with Brexit, what we have lost, or what the British citizens have lost, is their freedom of movement, which is one of the key things that has been lost. Whereas previously you could just nip on a flight and stay over for, you know, 4 months and nobody would really have any problems with that. It was complete free movement. Now you can't. So even if you have a secondary resident, you've had it for 30 years in France and you've paid all of your taxes in France, then you still can only stay in France for the 9180 rule, unless you have the appropriate visa, of course, which we can discuss as we go along.
Well, that leads perfectly into the next question then. So for those people with holiday properties, what are their options if they want to stay for more than those 90 days in one given trip?
So, you know, there's lots of visas available. The tourist visa, we talked about the Schengen visa, is a visa C. So that is a tourist visa, which, you know, is 90 days. And then if you want to stay for longer than 90 days, then you have to apply for a visa from the French consulate in the country of origin. Now, the types of visas that there are, obviously there's a visitor's visa, there's student visas, there are business visas, there are salaried visas, and it might be important as well to spend a second to explain what the difference between a visa and a residency or carte de séjour is, because people get confused with the vocabulary. So from a visa perspective, you would go to your consulate and request a visa which goes into your passport, and then you can go into the country. So you can fly into France with your visa, you show the authorities the visa, and then your passport doesn't get stamped because you've got the visa, okay? And then when you get into France, depending on which visa you have, either it will get validated by the immigration office and it becomes a residence permit, or you go to your local prefecture and request the appropriate residency permit, or carte de séjour as it's called in French, okay? So to answer your question concerning what options are available for people who have secondary homes in France but who are not residents, then there are not a huge amount of solutions available, because the 9180 day rules is in place. Because, you know, if you stay longer than 180 days in France, then you would become effectively a tax resident. So there is a reason for this 9180 rule. You can, of course, request a temporary visa which is more than 4 months, but up to 12 months. So, of course, specifically people who are residents of the UK who want to stay residents of the UK, then the maximum they really want to be staying in France for is 6 months. So in that case, they could request a temporary visa for 6 months. Bearing in mind, there are lots of requests for visas going through the consulate, and there are only, you know, only certain amounts of people get through. You know, out of the, I mean, I'm not talking about British at the moment because it's very new, but I'm talking Australia, America. They have maybe 3 million requests, and only, you know, a fraction of those get accepted. Not everybody can get in. So for those people who do have these properties, you have to decide first of all if you want to stay a tax resident of the UK or become a tax resident of France, and the solutions available depend on that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, that's really, really helpful. Thank you. And that temporary visa that you mentioned there, so a customer is wanting to stay tax resident in the UK, keep their home in the UK, but perhaps spend 5 months rather than 3 months in France in their holiday home. So they apply for that temporary visa. Can they do that every year? So, you know, a temporary visa for next summer and then the summer after, could they do that every year, or would they be found out, as it were?
Well, it's a temporary visa that is not renewable, of course, in France. It's a temporary visa that you would have to reapply for back in your country of origin. So effectively, you could reapply each year. Whether the consulate will accept it every year, that is down again to the regulations and what the quota is. But yes, effectively, it's a temporary permit that is valid for X amount of time. So normally 6 months, maximum 12 months, and you then renew it back in your country of origin each year. And it's got temporary on it because temporary you cannot renew in France. Okay. For those people who are thinking more of a longer term solution, want to move to France, to live in France but not work in France, then it's the long stay visitors visa that would be requested, which is a different visa. It's more than a temporary visa.
And that long stay visa that you just mentioned there, would that enable a customer to still remain resident in the UK and tax resident in the UK, but they could have that long stay visa? Or does that start to get into the territory of actually becoming tax resident in France?
Absolutely, yes. You cannot have a long stay visitors visa for 12 months in France and stay a UK tax resident. Hence why this 90-180 rule exists, because of course if you spend more than 180 days, automatically if you get audited you would become a tax resident of France. So you have to really think of that where you want to stay a tax resident of, because we talk about resident in France when really what we should be talking about is tax residency. Because if you have an audit and you've spent more time in France than the UK, or that is proved with an audit that you're not in the right, you've got the time frames wrong, then you could become a tax resident of France indirectly without even really wanting to. So the long stay visitors visa is really for people who want to become tax residents of France and want to stay here, maybe not work, be a lot like the visitors visa is a very good one for early retirees and retirees who want to just enjoy their home in France. And it's a renewable visa in France. That's the visa type D, not C. The C is the tourist visa. D is the long stay visitors visa, and that is renewable in France. But you would become a French resident because, of course, that's what you're asking for with a long stay visa. You're asking to become a resident of that country. And I suppose what's important to mention on there as well is if you do have a visa for France, bear in mind it is for France. It's not for all the other countries. Again, we've lost the freedom of movement. So where before you could come to Europe and go wherever you wanted in Europe for as much time as you wanted, really, with no major controls, now you would have to stay within the 90-180 in the whole of the Schengen area. So, if you came to France and then wanted to go to Spain and Italy, you could, as long as you didn't overstay those 90 days in 180, or your visa time limit, of course, if you've got a 6-month visa.
That's brilliant, Tracy. This has been so helpful and really great to understand all of these different types of visas. So one last question on the real sort of the more temporary and shorter term visas before we move into the longer term and residency. When a customer is applying for these, so they're applying in the consulate in their home country, and so for a lot of our listeners that will be here in the UK, how long typically does that visa application process take? Is it days, weeks, months? Can you give us a ballpark?
So typically at the beginning of the year, of course, it was pretty difficult because of the whole COVID situation. So there was a huge backlog. At the moment, it's a little bit more smooth, and it's taking, I would say, 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks maximum from the moment you have your appointment at the consulate, be that in London or Manchester. I think it's Glasgow as well. Wherever you have your appointment, usually it's about a 2 to 3 week limit. But they do say to make your application 3 months before you want to be in France, to be sure that you have an appointment. I'm finding at the moment the appointments are coming up quite easily in London, not so easy in Manchester. So yes, I would imagine counting at least 3 weeks. And what happens when you go to the consulate is you have to leave your passport there, of course, because the visa will be put into your passport. So that means during the 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, if it's a bit delayed, you obviously can't travel. So take that into account if you're somebody who travels a lot internationally. I think it might be important as well to mention for those that are thinking of the 90-180, as I get a lot of questions on the 90-180 about how it's measured and how it's calculated, and it's not an easy one to do. I have to share with you. It's very confusing, and I think even for people at the border control, it's confusing as well. But bear in mind, if you are coming from England into France or any other European country for that matter, if you don't have a visa, your passport will be stamped, and you have 90 out of 180 days. Now, what does that mean effectively? It means that you have to look at it as like a rolling window. So I literally tell my clients to look over the shoulder, physically look over the shoulder and look back on your last 90 days and see where you were. You can't be more than 90 days out the last 180 in that country. And there are calculators online that you can use to put in the dates that you've been in the country to work out how many days you've got left. You can just Google that, actually, you know, Schengen calculator. So you can use that in one big block. So you could come for 90 days. So you could come for 3 months and then leave for 3 months. Or you could come for a month, leave for a month, come for a month, leave for a month. And then each time you look back and see how many days you've accrued and how many days you've lost. So that is how the rule works. It's this rolling window. Okay, so bear that in mind if you are coming. Overstaying, a lot of questions I get about overstaying. If overstay, what happens? Now, obviously in the Schengen area, there's no border control, so no one's really going to know where you are, because if you're in France and you decide to go to Spain, nobody's going to stamp your passport. The problem will be is if once you leave in the Schengen area, when your passport then does get checked, if you have overstayed your 90 days or your 180 days, then of course that will be noticed. And maybe a couple of days, it's not the end of the world. But if you are thinking in the future of applying for a long stay visitors visa or requesting a business visa of any sort, if you have overstayed your welcome on a few occasions, that could be taken into account. So do be careful on that. It is a serious rule. Okay.
Thanks, Tracy. That's really great advice and really brilliant to hear your sort of inside knowledge on the process and the waiting times and everything like that. Thank you. I would like to kind of move on to the actually more permanent residency, the tax residency that we talked about there, because, you know, whilst we've got some people considering a purchase for a holiday home, we've also got a lot of people who are thinking exactly as you said, that they're planning to spend their retirement in France and planning to relocate, and they want to understand that process. So for retirees who want to permanently move to France, can you talk us through how they would start to go about securing that residency?
Yeah, so for retirees who really want to move to France on a permanent basis and become a tax resident in France and make France their main residency, then one solution that is highly appreciated by many of our retirees and our clients is the long stay visitors visa. So it's called visa long séjour, titre séjour. So it's VLS-TS. And that is important to remember. It's a visa D2 because it's a visa that is valid for 12 months, renewable in France. And a lot of people make the mistake of not emphasizing which visa they want, and they'll end up getting a temporary visa, which is the visa we spoke about earlier, which is renewable only in the country of origin. So if you are a retiree, my one point you should take away from this webinar is to make sure you request a renewable visa in France if you wish to stay in France. That's the first thing I would advise you. So this long stay visitors visa, VLS-TS, like every visa, is requested from the French consulate. And you would need to create your account online and apply via the online system and request an appointment. There's various documents that you will need to have. One of the most important documents would be, I would consider, is the healthcare cover. If you come in for 1 year, you need to have complete healthcare cover. And proof of financial stability. Those are the two key things. It's like anything with immigration. They really want you to prove who you are, where you're going to live, what your financial means are, and what your healthcare is. If you can prove those 4 points, generally speaking, your immigration file will be looking good. That is kind of the best solution for retirees, because they're not going to be working in France, and therefore they're going to be, you know, coming to France and living on their own wealth. That could be retirement pension, it could be savings, you know, income from other countries, so long as they are financially independent and have healthcare cover. Of course, once they come to France and they get their visa, the visa for a long stay visitors visa, and it's actually the only one that works this way is that you get the visa at the consulate. So you get your passport back after 3 or 4 weeks, you come to France with it, you validate that visa online within 2 months of being in France, you get a visit with the immigration office to check that you are who you say you are and that you have your health is fine. And then that visa is stamped, and that becomes your residency permit for the first year. So you have no other things to do. That is it for a year, and then you renew it 2 months before its expiry at your local prefecture. So it's quite a popular card simply because of that. And then, of course, when you do renew it, you will get the plastic card, which is the carte de séjour that people commonly know, which is a plastic card. So the visa long séjour is actually the one that is possibly the easiest from the perspective of you only have to go through the immigration once and then you're fine, really. And then you just renew it every year with very much the same type of conditions. You can, of course, access the healthcare system as well once you have your long stay visitors visa. That gives you the right to access the French healthcare system as a retiree. So that's an important point for many of you retirees who are listening to this.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Tracy. That's certainly, you've made it sound quite a simple process for people, and certainly a very good option. Now, in terms of actually getting that visa, so here in the UK at the consulate and getting that visa, you mentioned about proving, financial means and proving about health. Are there any actual documents that you recommend people have for that? Do they need a note from the doctor saying they're well? Do they need a bank statement proving money in the bank, things like that? What documents do you advise people sort of getting together?
Well, of course, everybody's situation is different, and everybody's financial situation is different as well. So there is not one kind of rule fits all, I have to say. There is a list of documents that you will get from the consulate when you make your application, but it is just a basic list. So I always say more is better. When you're going with immigration, more is always better, simply because depending on your situation, they can ask for more. They have the right to ask for anything. Certainly as a base, I would suggest that you have minimum 3 months bank statements. And you should be able to show a 1-year health certificate from €0, covering you for repatriation in France in case of accident or serious illness or death. And it's important that it is from €0. So if you have to go to the doctor for a cough or a cold, that is covered as well. So that has to be for France and probably for Europe, but certainly it doesn't have to be for the US or anywhere like that. So the private healthcare is very important, at least a minimum 3 months of bank statements. And of course, your identity papers. So especially for women, it's important. If you have a passport and you've changed your names and you've married twice and things like this, and your passport doesn't line up with your birth certificate, whether it's the consulate in France or when you get to the prefecture in France, these things have to line up. You have to be able to prove who you are. I mean, if you've got married and changed your name and then got divorced but kept the married name of your ex-husband, then these type of things have to be shown through your paperwork. I call it your paperwork footprints. So, if you need to take your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your divorce certificate, then take it all with you to show them that your name lines up with what's on your passport. That's mainly for women who change the name. If you, for example, have been divorced, you can take your divorce certificate. If your husband or wife is deceased, you can take the death certificate. These are supplementary documents that they have the right to ask you for, but you will never see on the list of documents that they ask for when you do your application. So this is inside information.
That's what you're here for, Tracy, giving us the inside track.
These documents you won't see on the base lists, but my advice to you is to take them with you, because they can ask for anything. What you will find as well is if you go for your visa, whatever visa you go for, when you've had your appointment with the consulate, if there is something that they haven't understood or they need, they will send you an email. So you will have the opportunity to rectify the file or give additional documents before a refusal. I would also suggest that anybody who is requesting a long stay visitor visa renewable in France. In fact, any visa, even if it's a short-term visa, temporary visa, should I say, to put a letter of motivation in there. Again, it's not something that you'll find on the list, but it's always very nice for them to understand what your motivations are to come to live in France. So financial statements, it's important to show them that you have a 3 months bank statements with obviously a certain amount of money in there is good. Or if you have a pension coming in, retirement pension, then of course the pension notifications. Proof of address where you're going to live in France. Now, this could be your secondary residency, so that's fine because you can show them a recent electricity bill, but you can also show them the proof of purchase. And that is an interesting document to show them because it means if you've bought your property and you don't have a mortgage, then financially you don't have to have quite as much money as if you don't and you're paying rent or you're paying a mortgage. So for those retirees who've bought their property and have no mortgage, then it's good to show that as well, for an example. If not, you can show your tax documents as well. You can always show your tax documents.
That's an important point there, Tracy, to raise. You mentioned about proof of ownership or proof of purchase of the property. Some of our customers will be going out to France. Perhaps they're renting somewhere for 6 months whilst they search for a property to buy. Are they still able to go through this visa process with a rental address and show their rental agreement rather than a formal, a property that they own?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. That is not a problem. You can put a rental address, or even to begin with for the process, you can put a hotel address. If you move into France and you've got a hotel for 3 months while you're looking for a property, you can put that on your visa application, but then explain that with your letter when you write your letter of motivation. Explain what your plans are so they understand. And a rental property is absolutely acceptable. So long as you show them that you've got your rental agreement or your, utility bill. The problem a lot of people have when they take rental properties is that most of the rental properties don't put anything in the name of the lessees, and that can be a problem, not just for the process of visas, but also once you're in France and want to get into the healthcare system, or want to do your car registration, or you want to do something with your driving license. If you don't have anything in your name like an electricity bill or a telephone bill, then it can be a problem. French are extremely paperwork focused. So my advice is usually, even if you've got a rental property and it's only 6 months, at least get something in your name. Or you need to ask the person who is renting the property what's called an attestation d'hébergement, which is basically a document showing that you are going to be staying at their property, and they will need to provide proof of that with an attestation d'hébergement. Okay. The same as if you're going to stay at a friend's house. A lot of people may stay at a friend's house for the first few months. And they also will have to provide an attestation d'hébergement, and they would need to go to their local mairie and request the attestation d'hébergement, and it costs €30. And basically, they're given a document that the people who are applying for the visa can show to the consulate, and that's where they're going to be staying. So there are solutions to lots of different scenarios. There always is a solution. You just have to make sure you get the right one that fits yours.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Tracy. Now, I just wanted to come back to a couple of the points that you raised there. A few questions have come through. Customer Philip has asked about healthcare. You mentioned, obviously, that with this visa, once you are in France and you've had it stamped, you are able to get access to the French healthcare system. But then you also mentioned needing private health insurance. Can you just clarify at what points in the process you have access to the different things?
Yeah, so your private healthcare is needed for a 12-month visa. It's not needed for a 6-month one. You can use your EHIC or GHIC card, as it's called now, I believe. But for a 12-month renewable visa, you have to have private healthcare insurance to get into France. Once you are in France and you've been living in France for 3 months or more and can prove it, then you can apply to the French healthcare system, the CPAM, and request to be part of the healthcare system as a retiree, showing your visa, of course, and all the rest of the papers that they ask. So yes, you can apply for it, but you have to be in France for 3 months. And whilst you're going through that process, which I can tell you can take 6 months, if not longer, you have your private healthcare insurance to cover you while you're going through it. So you're not supposed to be living in a country without healthcare cover. It's illegal. So you have to have healthcare cover. And that is why the private is there for, to help you once you're in France for those months while it takes to get into the French healthcare cover.
Brilliant. So your private healthcare is kind of the stopgap before you're entitled to the national cover. That's great. Thanks, Tracy. And the next point, which we get asked a lot, and I know a lot of questions have come in about this, is proving the amount of money in the bank. I know everybody's circumstances are different, but is there a particular threshold that they expect you to meet of, income or savings in the bank, or is it all a bit vague?
It's, and this is a question that comes all the time. And of course there is a threshold, but of course they take into account whether you have income coming in, or if you own your property, or, there's these little things they take into account. As a rule of thumb, and this is really a rule of thumb, so it's not, written in blood, a rule of thumb I say to my clients is to have 1,500 euros per month for the stay. So you want to be counting to have about between 15 and 20,000 euros in your, or sterling, if it's the UK bank accounts that you're showing, in your bank accounts to show that you have enough financial stability to get you through that first year in France. And of course, what's important as well is if you don't have a rent, if you don't have any income, so you're not getting pension, if you've not got any other income coming in, then you're going to be able to have to show bigger savings, because that's 1 year's worth. But when you want to renew it, you're going to have to show the same again. So if you've got a pension coming in that's over 1,000 and 1,200 euros a month every month between a couple, then that's sufficient funds. You won't have to have 20 grand in your bank account. If you've got a revenue coming in that meets that criteria on a monthly basis, and you can prove that, then you can have less savings. So as you can see, there's a bit of a mix max of what they'll take into account and how it will apply to people. But yes, a rule of thumb, you want to be counting 1,500 per month for 12 months, and then other criteria can be taken into account.
Great, thank you. I hope that helps customers who are asking that question. Now, a question that we've had from a lot of you today, this comes up all the time, is married couples, one half of the couple is a UK citizen with a British passport, one half of the couple has got is a citizen of another EU country, got an EU passport. Are there any advantages if you are in that kind of relationship with the other party having an EU passport? Does that help any of that process? Or as the British citizen, do you still need all the visas?
So yes, it does help, because if you're an EU, I mean, it's a bit like the British was before. When you're an EU citizen, you have less papers to go through. So if you are married to or paxed with an EU citizen, the British person can attach to that person. So if you're living in the UK currently with that EU citizen, then I would still suggest get a short stay visa to come across with. And the reason I say that is because the delays in France for carte de séjour are extremely long. Although it's not obligatory, you can come into France on the short stay visa, the 9180 rule. You could come into France with your EU partner on the 9180 and apply as the husband or wife of that EU partner at your local prefecture. However, the problem there is you've only got 3 months to do it. And of course, the delays in the prefectures due to COVID and Brexit are often 5 to 6 months. So although it's not obligatory to apply for a visa, to come into France, because you can go on the 9180, my advice to people in that scenario would be to get a visa anyway from the consulate as traveling with an EU person. You'll get a visa, come into France, and then go to the prefecture and request a carte de séjour attached to an European citizen. One important point about that is it's the EU citizens' revenue that is taken into account. Their financial situation is what is important, not yours. So if you are the breadwinner of the family and and the EU person doesn't have any money, then you'll have difficulties, because when you go to the prefecture, what they're interested in is the EU person. They're the person who you are attaching to, therefore their situation is going to be taken into account. Okay, So, but yes, effectively it is easier. And another easier if you're married to a French person as well. If you're married to a French person, you can come straight into France and request the carte séjour married to a French citizen, and they can't refuse it.
Brilliant. That's really helpful and really useful to know. And I hope that that's answered the queries, because I know we've got a number of you listening who that circumstance covers you. Now, a crucial question. You've been really detailed explaining about the process and about the documentation that customers need and what's best to do. How much do these visas cost? How much is this whole process potentially likely to cost a customer?
The actual visa itself, when you go to the consulate, costs €99 per adult. I mean, if it's in sterling, I think it's about €90. So it's €99 per adult. And then, depending on what visa you have, when you come to France, there will be a cost at the immigration. So when the visa gets validated online, then there is a cost of, if it's the long stay visitors visa, for example, the renewable one, that's €225 currently. So that is what you would pay online, and you keep proof of that for the renewal.
Brilliant. That's very helpful. Thank you. A couple more questions on the finance side of things. We've got some listeners, although we talked quite a lot about retirees, we do have some listeners who are hoping to work when they get to France. Some people looking to live in France but continue to work remotely for their UK-based employers. Some people hoping to get a job in France. Can you just give us a bit of an outline into what tax rates are and what taxes people could expect to pay if they become tax resident in France?
Well, the tax rates, I don't have them in front of me, but the tax rates themselves are not extortionate. They're no worse than the UK ones, that's for sure. So, I think the first bracket is from 0 to about 10k, you don't pay anything. From 10k to 27, it's 11%. From 27 to about 75, it's 30%, and then it goes to 45. And of course, they are just, approximate numbers. But what you need to bear in mind here, and I think even more important, the tax brackets for the conversation, for the questions you just put to me, is not so much about, what the tax liability will be. It's more about if they actually can come and do what they want to do. Because if you have a job in the UK, and you are a salaried person or an independent worker in the UK, and you come to France, you are not allowed to work in France even remotely. This is not allowed because you're no longer part of the EU. There's no right to work in France, and working remotely for a UK company is classed as working in France, and therefore it would mean that employer would have to either send you as a detached employee, pay the social charges in France. Obviously there's different things to happen with that. So that's one thing. If anybody's working in the UK for a job and thinks, well, because of COVID I can work wherever I want, no, you can't. Unfortunately, there's a lot of rules about that. I mean, I'm not saying people don't do it, but I'm here to let you know what's possible, and that's not what is possible. You can, of course, apply for business visas and work visas and things like that. The process is a little bit more arduous. If you want to set up your own business in France, for example, you can apply for a liberal visa, which allows you to set up your own small business in France. And so you're independent. That's what a lot of people do. If you're looking for a job, then of course you have to have a company to sponsor you, which means they have to prove that nobody else in France, or that they've advertised the job in France and nobody can meet the requirements. Often that could be a good one if they want somebody who's speaking English or have a certain vocabulary in a certain domain. That can be a good one. But yeah, the process is a little bit more complicated, and I would certainly suggest anybody who's thinking of moving to France and wanting to work or have business, then they would need an in-depth conversation on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tracy. And we certainly recommend for those customers who've got some of those quite sort of niche requirements and particular circumstances of their own, definitely do get in touch with Tracy, and she will be able to do a proper consultation and understand what you need. Because yes, the idea of working remotely, now that we can do that, doing that from the sunny Côte d'Azur, certainly sounds very appealing. So yeah, do get in touch with Tracy and talk about your specific requirements. One last question that's come in that's an interesting one is, we've talked again quite a lot about retirement. At what age are you actually classed as a retiree? People retire at various different points and choose to, claim private pensions and things like that. At what point is there a cut-off point for France that they would class you as a retiree?
Well, It's not so much a retiree. Well, I guess it's a kind of a twofold question, because if you come into France as a retiree, you can be an early retiree. So, you know, from the moment you're 62 and over, and you're receiving a retirement pension, because in France you can retire from the age of 62 if you have reached all of your trimesters, if you have the amount of work you should do, but it can go up to 67. So between 62 and 67 you can retire in France, depending if you've paid as what you should into the system. So if you come in from the UK as a retiree and applying for this long stay visitors visa, you don't actually have to be retired. It's a long stay visitors visa. What it actually implies is you come into France to live and not work in France, and you will sign a document that you're not going to work in France, and you're going to live off your own personal wealth. So you don't necessarily have to be retired. You could be 45 and come on a long stay visitors visa, so long as you can prove that you're not going to work in France and that you're going to live on your own personal wealth. So although it's highly unlikely that anybody of 45 would do that, they're probably somewhere else. But yeah, so it's not so much about the retirement age, it's more about having their own income coming in. It's often people who will get to the retirement stage that have those pensions coming in who come to retire. But it could be that you're actually, not of retirement age and just receiving dividends from a company on a yearly basis, and you're living off that, But the retirement age in France is from 62 to 67. So, but that doesn't affect anybody moving to France, and it wouldn't affect your access to the healthcare system, because you would access the healthcare system because you have the visa and because you'd be here for longer than 3 months.
Brilliant. That's very, very helpful, Tracy. Thank you so much. I hope that clarifies those questions. I'm conscious of our time today. There are so many of you listening in with so many fantastic questions. So we've tried to answer as many of them as possible, but Tracy's details are on screen. So if you had anything that wasn't answered and you do want to arrange a consultation to discuss in more detail, do get in touch. But last couple of quick questions. We've got a customer listening who wants to retain their home in the UK. They want to still own that and keep that, but they do want to become resident in France. Are there any issues doing that?
There's no issues doing that, no. I mean, they can come to France and live in France and keep the UK home. I would suggest the one thing to think about that is if they decide to become a French resident and they still have the UK home, and then they decide to sell the UK home at a later stage and they have a French home, then of course you need to think about capital gains, because of course you would have some liability possibly on that. So that you want to probably reach out to a financial advisor to make sure that you've got all the dots and all the T's crossed. But yeah, there's no problem. You can have UK property and French property. You can have property anywhere in the world and live in France. It's not only an issue of property, it's an issue of tax.
Brilliant, very helpful, thank you. And our last question for the day, we've obviously talked a lot about UK customers. The bulk of our listeners today are joining us from the UK, but we do have some American listeners. We do have somebody from New Zealand joining us. Obviously, as we have now left the EU, I imagine that the process for customers in the US, Canada, New Zealand is very similar to what it is for us as UK citizens now that we're not in the EU. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And of course, before Brexit, most of my clients, and still a lot of my clients, come from the US and from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, from an immigration perspective, and then of course for the healthcare and the general assimilation into the French system. So the rules, whether it be for British or for Americans or Australians, are very similar. The visas are the same, the papers, they need the same. What is different is, of course, their consulates are in their country of origin and they can request different papers. So it can be a little bit more complicated for certain countries than others, but the processes themselves are the same. Yes, the same rules apply.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up for us. I think that's all we've got time for today. As I say, do get in touch with Tracy if you want to arrange a consultation for your specific circumstances, because there are a lot of you with us today. Thank you so much for everyone taking the time to listen to us live, and any of you who are catching up on this on demand, thank you for watching it back. Thank you, Tracy, for all of the fantastic information you've given today. It's been so clear and so informative. So I think you'll have a lot more people giving you a ring, taking your advice and making the move out to France. Thank you. We will be in touch with all the listeners to send you a replay of today's session if you want to pass it on to any friends or family, or take a listen again if there's anything that you missed. And we also do have a session coming up on the 9th of October. It's a Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. UK time, which also talks about the buying process and gives you advice on property searching, how that process works, the legalities of actually buying your property in France. So we'll pop a link to that on screen now as well if you do want to register and join us in that session. But thank you again to Tracy for all of that wonderful advice. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we wish you a really happy and successful move to France. Bye, everyone.
Bye.